Hey guys, this video is going to go on our Myths About Japan playlist, but it's a bit different from the previous ones that we've made. The previous ones we've made were mainly myths that people outside Japan had about Japan. So myths that we see on the internet and on TV sometimes and in the media about things about Japan that just aren't true. In this case, this is actually a video about myths that some Japanese people hold about Japan and about non-Japanese people. So it's a bit of a twist. However, it is actually relevant to non-Japanese people as well, because if you live here, you will experience this. And so we'll get into it so it starts to make more sense. This video was triggered by a comment. We made a video quite a while ago about the cicadas, about the cicadas that we have here in summer. And when the temperature gets to about 30 degrees every year, the cicadas come out and off they go. And they'll go hard up to 24 hours a day, depending on the temperature, for a few weeks. And then eventually they all die off and disappear. So the cicadas make a very, what's the word? There's a very classic sound that's very classic Japanese summer. So it's part of the Japanese summer thing. So we made that video and we call it noisy insects in Japan, because it can't be denied that they're very, very loud. But we went out of our way with that video to show you. We used a special boom and actually showed you the insects in the tree and tried to give you a bit of a insect's perspective, a cicada's perspective on themselves, and show the insect and try and get a bit of an idea of what the actual sound is that it makes. And we got a comment on that video today from some Japanese guy who said, to Japanese people, we don't hear the noise, we hear the feeling, but of course foreigners can only hear the noise. Some comment like that, right? Which to a lot of you guys would say, well, that's a fair comment, or that's not such an unusual comment. The thing is, we hear stuff like that all the time, and half of that comment is, and again, we go out of our way on every video we make. We go out of our way to say not all Japanese people are the same. Our videos are generalizations. The most that we'll ever say is that a lot of Japanese people think this way, or a lot of Japanese people do this thing, or we might even say most Japanese people do this thing, because there are things that we can say that about. Most Japanese people will eat rice every day. Most Japanese people will use chopsticks. Most Japanese people bow when they're greeting you. You know, there are generalizations that we can make, but we never say everybody, because you just can't, can you? When you're talking about human beings, there's no group of people where everybody does the same thing. There's always somebody who does something differently. So we're really careful about that to make it really clear that our videos are generalizations. However, to many Japanese people, perhaps even most, being everybody doing the same thing, and we've given you lots of examples of this on previous videos, everybody doing the same thing and thinking the same way and agreeing with the same ideas and being the same is a very comfortable idea. To some of us in some cultures, that idea makes us a bit uncomfortable, but in Japanese society, it's considered that everybody doing the same thing and saying the same thing and thinking the same thing maintains harmony. And most Japanese people will agree with that that's good. If everybody does the same thing and thinks the same thing and says the same thing, that maintains harmony. And the people that do that here, the best, are really well respected. And so we've talked about this a lot in previous videos. We've showed lots of examples of this, and it's pretty well accepted that is the case, that Japan is fairly much like that everybody sort of tries to do the same thing. So Japanese people like to think that everybody does the same and thinks the same, and it is definitely an asset, a part of Japanese thinking, Japanese society, and it's perpetuated and reflected in the media. We see it all the time in the media, where they show aspects of that and examples of that and sort of perpetuate it. So as well as reflecting the reality of that, the television and the media sort of encourage it by showing more and more. This is what we Japanese people do. This is what we Japanese people do. And then we've showed you before TV shows like Cool Japan and things like that, where they interview foreigners and talk about what we Japanese people do. And they do have a really strong thinking that Japanese people are all the same and all think the same. And they'll say things like that all the time. Japanese people do this, Japanese people do that. And they don't qualify it like we do, where we say not all Japanese people are the same. They'll actually say Japanese people do this, Japanese people do that. In Japan we do this, in Japan we do that, and we all do that. So that's half of it. The other half is that a lot of Japanese people think that all foreigners are the same. And we see this all the time, and on TV and in the media here all the time. Foreigners do this, and they'll do this on TV all the time. They'll say, you know, Japanese people do this, foreigners do this. And so not only, you know, it's sort of, you could say it's sort of fair enough lumping all Japanese people together when you've got a country of islands like this, where there's a lot of people in a very small space, where it's probably fair to say that the majority of people in this small space all do the same thing, or most of them do the same thing. It's probably a fair comment that most Japanese people do think similarly and do similar things most of the time. It's probably a fair comment. However, to suggest, on the other hand, that everybody outside this little group of islands all do the same thing is obviously way from the truth, right? I mean, it's sort of irrational, really, isn't it, to suggest, and because they lump us all together, they call us gaijin, or politely they say gaikokujin, but they call us gaijin, and they'll just say the gaijin do this, the gaijin do that, the gaijin think this, the gaijin think that, which is absolutely incredible when you think about it, that they're lumping, they're suggesting, some Japanese people are suggesting that, you know, all Chinese people and all American people and all Indian people and all French people and all Irish people and all Danish people and all the people of the world, just lumping us into one group and making these big blanket statements about what the foreigners do, right? And when you live here, you get it all the time. You get it all the time. Classically, what will happen is somebody will see something on TV where some TV show says, oh, you know, the foreigners do this, and they show some example of the foreigner doing something in some country somewhere, and then the next day, and sometimes if it's a big thing, recently, a few years ago, there was a story in Australia. And they're funny what they report on. The Japanese TV programs, when they go to other countries, it's amazing what they report on. You know, when you look at the countries they go to, and you think all the interesting things they could report on in that country, they pick the weirdest things, and it's usually things that they know Japanese people will be, oh, you know. And so they came back from Australia and showed footage of this Japanese family who lived in Australia, and they showed footage of their kids running around outside with no shoes on. And so for the next couple of months, all these different people that we run into in our daily lives kept saying, oh, is it true? Is it true? And as soon as they'd say it, we'd know what was coming. Is it true that in Australia people run around outside without shoes on? And because they're amazed, because Japanese people are sort of all similar to each other in a lot of ways, they assume that if a foreigner does something, all the foreigners must do it. More recently, there was a story about Australia, and they said they showed somebody washing dishes, and they were washing dishes in soap and water, and then just putting them out to dry and weren't rinsing them. Now, to most of us, we wouldn't have even noticed that, right? Most of you guys, if you saw that on a TV show, likely you wouldn't even notice it. However, from a Japanese point of view, for the next couple of weeks, people kept saying, oh, in Australia, is it true? You know, and then this really sort of laughing sort of way of reacting to that, and then assuming that we all do that, and oh yeah, you know, and it's sort of funny because to them that makes us seem really weird, but in actual fact their reaction to that comes across to us as being extremely weird. Like, why do you even care? And why do you assume that everybody from that country does the same thing? So they're assuming that every Australian person must wash their dishes the same way, every Australian person must be running around outside with no shoes on. But then that's just about one country. But then they'll tell you things from other countries. You know, just a quick example of this, we mentioned this on a previous video, but I was at a Kyudo Taikei once, a big Kyudo Taikei in Nagoya, and there's 500 people there doing Kyudo. And my teacher came running up to me, oh, come here, come here, come here. And I thought he was going to introduce me to some teacher or something, because sometimes they do that, they'd come and introduce me to some teacher. And he's come over, come here, come here, come here, and he's taken me through amongst all these people to the other side of the room, and here's this big blonde guy standing there, and he's gone, here, right? Here. That was basically the whole explanation. Look, a foreigner, basically. And sort of, here I am, you know, here's this guy and I stand there looking at each other, and I said to him, oh, you know, hello, and because he said to me, oh, hello, sorry, I don't speak English. And I said, oh, where are you from? In Germany. Oh, okay. I said, I'm sorry, I don't speak German. So we stood there and spoke in Japanese, right? Now, he was a lovely guy and everything, but a German guy and an Australian guy who don't even have a common language, you know, he didn't speak English, I didn't speak German, so we're standing there speaking Japanese, and the only thing we had in common with each other was that we weren't Japanese, and that was it. But from the Japanese perspective, you know, the Japanese people are in one group, and the foreigners are all in one group. And the fact that he's from Germany and I'm from Australia was irrelevant to them. As far as they're concerned, we're in the same group, so we should be like lifelong buddies. And so we sort of stood there and had a bit of an uncomfortable conversation for a little while about how long we'd each been in Japan and what we're doing here, and sort of, oh, well, I'll catch you later sort of thing, and sort of wandered back to where we came from. And it was, and that's really common, that sort of thing is really, really common. And then that suggestion that the guy that triggered the video today, you get that sort of thinking as well, that it's sort of, it is true. There is actually a phenomenon, it has a name, I can't remember what the name is. Some people have been on to us recently about giving things different names. We had a video recently about wordy, and we've made videos before about things and we give them our own name. The reason is we don't get our information from Wikipedia or from other sources where we get the correct names for these things. Our videos are our own direct observations, and that's why we give things our own names and we describe things in our own terms, because we figure that some people don't want to get videos made about, you know, that include information from Wikipedia or from other sources, that some people want to watch videos that are direct from the source. So our videos are purely observational, and that's why we give things our own names. And there is a phenomenon, and I don't know the name, but no doubt someone will wiki it, someone will go to Wikipedia and find it, but there is a phenomenon in Japan where Japanese people do like to think, and they're comfortable to think, that they are, and to quote Obama, exceptional, and that they think that there is a sort of way of thinking in Japan that Japanese people are a bit special and a bit unique. And it's sort of true, to a certain extent it is true, but they really feel comfortable in that feeling that they are really unique and that no one else can really understand the Japanese way of thinking or feeling. And of course, you know, to a certain extent that's true, but as human beings, you know, if you live in Japan for 10, 20 years, you know, the phenomenon or the connection between the cicadas and summer and our life here, of course we make the same connection. To suggest that Japanese people can understand there's a deeper meaning to the sound that the semis make, and that, you know, foreigners won't get that, foreigners will just think it's loud noise, is it's ignorant, really. It's actually an ignorant comment, because of course when we live here long term, of course we stop and appreciate, and you guys that watched our videos will have seen lots of videos that we make about appreciating all sorts of aspects of Japanese culture, including little minute, unimportant little details, you know, that we think we value. We value some of the little unimportant tiny details because that's what makes the place what it is, and that includes the insects. So we do value the sounds that the semi make. The fact that we called it noisy insects in Japan is because as well as making an interesting sound and being connected to the changing of the seasons and all the other deeper stuff, the reality is semi are really, really loud. And despite what that guy said about, oh, Japanese people seeing it as being a feeling and foreigners aren't going to get that, they're just going to see it as being noisy. Well, no, sorry. At least one foreigner, no doubt a lot of other foreigners watching this video will have appreciated the sound of semi, mate. But we also have Japanese people in our family and neighbours and friends and other people who will often comment on how loud the semi are, you know, because when you happen to have a whole bunch of them in a tree outside your house, or if you're trying to have a conversation outside in summer and you happen to be close to a tree full of semi, you know, people comment on how noisy they are all the time. You know, so to suggest otherwise is just crazy. Now, that might seem like a lot of our examples often will seem sort of insignificant, and people will often say that's a silly thing to worry about, or why would that bother you? But the thing is that this small example is an example of maybe, you know, 200, 300, 500, 1,000 comments that we've heard, you know, in Japan from people making similar sort of comments, and we get it all the time. You get it all the time, and you know, it does sort of wear you down for a few reasons. One is that, you know, you're living here long term, and that you know, you're living the same life basically. When you live in Japan long term and you're living with your Japanese family and you're surrounded by your Japanese neighbours and friends, and you know, we've mentioned this before, we probably see foreigners or spend time with foreigners face to face probably 2 or 3 times a year, and that's about it. That's about it. So we're really living a normal Japanese life, really. So when someone watches you eating and says, "Oh, geez, you're really good with chopsticks," you know, when you come here for a couple of weeks and you get a comment like that, you know, it sort of makes you feel good. You know, sometimes, you know, it can make you feel good, or at least it's not going to bother you. But when you live here permanently, and you're living the same life as everybody else, little comments like that really wear you down, you know, because it's suggesting that what Japanese people master chopsticks, but you know, a foreigner being able to use 2 sticks to eat their food is an amazing thing. Well, you know, although it's meant as a compliment, when you get these sort of comments all the time, constant reminders that you're different, and that lumping you all in. You know, there's that thing again, that lumping all the Japanese people in together and all the foreigners in together, you know, and you get this all the time. The other thing that really wears you down too sometimes is the questions. What do foreigners think about this? What do foreigners eat for breakfast? What do foreigners, you know, what do foreigners think about this? What do foreigners do this? What do foreigners like? What do foreigners don't like? You know? And that, I mean, that's an amazing question, isn't it? To ask you what foreigners eat for breakfast, or what foreigners, and often it's what foreigners think about this and what foreigners think about that, which is just an amazing question. You know, assuming that Russians and New Zealanders and Ethiopians and you know, all the people from around the world eat the same thing for breakfast. And seriously, we get those sort of questions all the time from adults as well as kids. Other people will narrow it down a bit more and say Westerners. What do Westerners eat for breakfast? Well, again, you know, are you talking about French people, or are you talking about Canadian people, or are you talking about, you know, who are you talking about with your question about Westerners? You know, what will Westerners have for breakfast? What do Westerners think about this? What do Westerners think about that? You know, it's assuming again, and it just seems to be that so many Japanese people seem to be comfortable with this way of thinking, that all the Japanese people are exactly the same, and all the people outside this little group of islands are all exactly the same. And to some extent, it's sort of, without meaning any disrespect or anything, the correct word for that would be ignorant, wouldn't it? Because obviously it's showing a lack of understanding of what the world's like, you know, what human beings are like, and just assuming that because this place is, everybody here is striving to be exactly the same, that everybody outside this group of islands is all the same, exactly the same too. So So really the reason that this video was made was because if you spend long term here, I mean, if you're only here for a short time, usually things like this, when you're only here for a short time, usually they're just novel and interesting questions and things, and usually people here short time aren't bothered in the slightest by stuff like this, but it's when you're here long term, and you're getting this all the time, you know, and you're sitting at a table, and quite often it's total strangers will ask you these things. They're sitting there, you know, at a table of people, and you're there with your Japanese family and Japanese friends, and everybody's sitting around the table, and everybody's eating the same thing and doing the same thing and having the same conversation in Japanese, and everybody's exactly the same, except that it's quite obvious that you're a foreigner. And so out of the blue, just out of nowhere, they have to ask you a question about what foreigners think about something, or what foreigners do, or some other thing that, as well as assuming that we're all the same, is also a sort of another reminder yet again that you're the foreigner, you're different, you know, and in a place where everybody's aspiring to all be exactly the same, or a lot of people are aspiring to be exactly the same, to be reminding you yet again that you're the foreigner is basically just letting you know that they can't forget that you're the foreigner, and so they're bringing it up yet again. So yeah, so if you come to Japan, we just have to accept it, of course. Again, it's one of those things that, you know, it's sort of not surprising really when you consider that most of the people, you know, they've either not been outside Japan, or if they have been outside Japan, they've gone off for a week or two in a country and they've come back, and the things that they've noticed and the things that they've seen and everything else, they haven't noticed the subtlety. It's sort of similar to people who've come to Japan for a week or two and they go back. And we get comments from people that have been here for a week or two all the time, where we make a video about something and they say, no, that's not true, I was in Japan and I never saw that once. And it's because these sort of things you don't always notice when you're in a place short term. And it's the same as the Japanese people traveling to other countries. You know, if they travel to other countries for short periods of time, they're not going to necessarily notice that people have different points of view and different sort of lifestyles and things, because they're traveling around in buses and staying in hotels and visiting tourist destinations and things like that. Whereas you get a Japanese person who's lived in another country for 2 or 3 years, they're going to come back here knowing that not everybody in that country was the same, you know, and they'll know that, you know, some people in that country used to take their shoes off at the door and some people didn't, and some people ate cereal for breakfast and some people had coffee for breakfast, and, you know, those people will generally have a bit more of an idea of what the world's really like. But it's fascinating. It really is. It's fascinating. You know, you'll notice the frustration, and if you talk to foreigners that have lived here long term about this topic, you know, it'll set them off, and they'll give you 100 examples of this. Oh, the guy asked me once. Some guy said this to me once, and some guy said that to me once, and they'll give you 100 examples of this straight away. And things on TV, Japanese TV. Seriously, guys, 99% of it's crap. I mean, you could say that about TV in a lot of countries, couldn't you? But Japanese TV in particular, because it really encourages this sort of thinking, and everybody's sitting around agreeing with each other, and you very rarely see a debate on anything important on Japanese TV. It's just everybody sitting around agreeing with each other on everything and having the same opinion on everything, and when the stuff comes up about foreigners, you're better off not watching it usually, because it just drives you nuts. All these stereotyping. They'll stop some foreigner walking down the street in Tokyo with a backpack on, and they'll stop him with the microphone and say, can I ask you a question? And they'll ask a question, and the guy will answer, and they'll go back to the studio, and everyone in the studio's going, tashuka ne, so, moshiron ne. And so, because his answer to the question was something, oh, that's what the foreigners think, right? Because some Danish guy that they stopped on the street and asked a question, because his opinion was this, then we have to assume that all the foreigners think that, right? And they will. They'll just go, oh, yeah, that's it, you know. And so if you sit as a foreigner, as a non-Japanese person, if you're sitting there watching this on TV, sometimes it's like, oh, you got to be kidding, you know. And of course, quite often, what they show you on Japanese TV is exactly what they want to show you. So they will have an audience full of people and ask them specific questions and get specific answers, and there you go. That's what the foreigners think. And you often sit there and thinking, well, that's not right. You know, that might be what that guy thinks. It's not what most of the rest of us think. Depends on who they ask, doesn't it? So, anyway, so yeah, that's the myth. That's the myth, that everybody in Japan is exactly the same and everybody outside of Japan is exactly the same. Because you can clearly see, have a look through the comment section under this video, you can clearly see we're not all the same, are we? We all have different ways of thinking and different opinions and different thoughts on just about everything. So to lump us all together is a pretty funny thing to do, isn't it? Anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.